to learn the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I feel like if you want to, it's important to know these things, because if you love your country, you need to know all aspects of it.
Hey everybody, welcome to another week of Ryan and Rodrigo. And this week we're really lucky to be joined by my old friend Nicole, and she's coming to us from Seattle, Washington, my very favorite city ever. And something interesting about Nicole, something that her and Rodrigo have in common, is that Nicole and Rodrigo are my two most recent bosses, two of the people who formed me and shaped me and led me to become the person that I am today. And so, actually, I want to start with a question for Rodrigo. Rodrigo, are you thankful that you didn't have to deal with me when I was a less mature, less grown up, less productive Ryan?
A little. I gotta say I'm a little thankful, but to be honest, um, I don't have much against you, or I don't have much to say about you, bad things, or other than the fact you're a nerd and I'm not. Okay, being a nerd is not a problem, but the problem here is that I'm not a nerd at all. I don't. It's not that I'm not a nerd. I am a nerd, but for other stuff. I am a nerd for English. I'm not a nerd for sci-fi like you are, and um, so I am thankful that I didn't catch all the questions about sci-fi like for the past 20 years. I just got the past 8 years. So yes, I am a bit thankful.
And do you remember, Nicole, any things that you might have taught me and helped me to be a better person along the way?
Oh man, that's a great question. I think you were one of the people that I shared some wisdom with that was given to me when I was young, which is there is value in the economy of words. Um, to sit back and to listen sometimes has more power than voicing an opinion on every issue. Now, if I could learn, like actually, adhere to that myself, I would probably be doing better. But yeah, no, I think that that was probably one of the things that I shared with you. Um, Also, drink a lot of water, making sure to keep hydrated, helping to make sure when you're going out there canvassing that you had enough water with you to sustain you through the trip, because hydration is important.
Yeah, I do remember you telling me to listen to people, and I do remember that that was one of those things that was like, do as I say, not as I do.
Oh,
You know?
100%. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, it's just because I'm right about everything. No, I'm totally kidding. Oh my gosh, if I had an opportunity to have a conversation with mid 20 something me, so many things would be different.
For sure. But what are you doing now? What is your job now? I know that we used to work together in politics and community organizing, but what's up with you now?
Yeah, I have a super cool job. I'm the director of development at Bellevue Arts Museum, which is an arts museum in Bellevue, Washington, as the name would suggest. It's not technically a museum, though. We're a Kunsthalle, which is the German, it's an art hall, because we don't have a permanent collection. So we are constantly rotating through exhibitions. And that gives us the ability to work with local and emerging artists in a super cool way. So we have anywhere from 9 to 12 exhibitions every year. And we often, as I said, showcase local and emerging artists and help to highlight talent in the region. And we're also not so much about the passive consumption of art. It's more about an exhibition being a catalyst for a dialogue around
Hmm.
our shared experiences.
Hmm. And like a lot of people, at least Brazilian people, people not familiar with the area, will know Seattle and will think of like the music scene. Will think of like maybe Kurt Cobain, even though he was from south of Seattle. But they don't really know anything
Evergreen.
about Bellevue. Like, what is up in like what's up with Bellevue? Can you
So
describe
Bellevue,
Bellevue?
yeah, so Bellevue used to be the suburb of Seattle, one of the suburbs of Seattle. It was always thought of as this like super affluent community. It's where like Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos live, the founder of Microsoft and the founder of Amazon. And it is, you still see a lot of wealth, you still see a lot of power seated in that area. But it's also a minority majority city now. So the majority of folks living in Bellevue are by POC, Black, Indigenous people of color. And so that has created this just really rich cultural scene on the east side that doesn't get as much the east side of Seattle that doesn't get quite as much attention as it deserves. But the art scene over there is really amazing. When I first moved to Seattle in 2005, there was just this amazing underground visual art scene. You would see old warehouses being taken over and progressive murals happening where one artist would come in and spray paint a mural, and then the next artist would come in and have 48 hours to kind of read the story of the first mural, and they would wrap around the building. And you don't get that anymore. We've lost over 75% of cultural spaces in the region as we've seen this big economic boom in our region. And so having a place where artists can still show their talent and not worry about the commercial viability of it, not worrying about whether or not the piece is going to sell, and just creating it for the sake of art, creating it for the sake of dialogue, creating it for the good of the community. It's a really, it's an important little bastion that we need to hold on to and protect.
Nice. And what you do now with the art museum, is it related very much to what you studied?
Not so much in my undergrad, but very much in my graduate program. So my master's is in strategic fundraising and philanthropy. My undergraduate was in economics and general sciences. So a little bit, because I'm in fundraising. So, you have to understand the waves of the economy to create good fundraising strategies, but it's not so much getting into the micro macro aspect of studying the systems of the economy.
And you studied, what university did you study your undergraduate at? It was Evergreen, right?
Evergreen State College, go Gooey Ducks.
Yeah, gooey ducks, right. Never look at a picture of a gooey duck because you'll never want to see another life form ever again.
Nope.
I know that Evergreen is kind of unique for a few reasons. Like, I've heard that they don't really have a course. They let students choose their own course. Like, can you explain how that works? Kind of, it's very self-focused.
So there's no grades. There's no grades at Evergreen. You don't get a grade. Yeah, you get a written evaluation of your work, which is actually really beneficial. So in traditional academics, if you take a test and you get 70%, that's a C. That's not viewed as a really good grade. And you beat yourself up about it. At Evergreen, you get 70%, and the mentality is, great, now let's focus on that 30% that you didn't know, because you knew 70% of the material. So this is the area in which you need to focus on to make sure that you're understanding the subject matter. Also, instead of looking at programs in silos, it was interdisciplinary studies. So I took one program called the Olympic Peninsula, which is a region in Washington State. And we looked at not only the geography and the geology and the economic history of that area, but we also looked at the weather systems. We looked at the indigenous history. We looked at how all of these things wove together to create the region as we know it, and how they were all interrelated, which is a really fascinating way to think about it because, in reality, in life, these things don't exist in isolation. Our economic system is very much impacted by our environmental policy, which is impacted by our education system, which is impacted by socioeconomic status of disenfranchised communities. All these things are connected together in reality. So when it comes to academia, why do we study them in silos? But yeah, there was no grades. It was pretty great. My dad was like, am I really sending you to a hippie school? Wasn't 100% on board, but then once they saw some of the stuff that I was getting to study, they were pretty excited about it.
And you can kind of choose your own course too, right? They don't have specific course paths. You kind of choose your own course. So you chose a very traditional one. You chose economics. And so that's a little bit more straightforward. But I remember some people from Evergreen having very unique courses that they studied, and I can't remember any right now, but they're very like, this is the only person who's ever studied this specific thing, and they graduated in that.
Yeah, no, that definitely happens. Like, well, even in economics, it wasn't cut and dry. It wasn't the way that you see econ taught at a traditional university. So my undergraduate thesis was on the economics of renewable energy in Washington State, which normally is something you would look at kind of at the graduate level to be able to see something that granular. But to look at how the climate patterns affected the viability of different types of renewable energies, and how that would impact kind of more disenfranchised economic areas in the state, is not something that you would see in traditional studies, and it is very granular. Also, that specific project allowed me to go to Copenhagen to an international renewable energy exchange conference. I was the only American that was there. I was the only student that was there. I was a bit of an anomaly and a celebrity there because of that. But it was really amazing to see how in the European Union, which has a much stronger emphasis on the need for renewable energies, how they were doing a guarantee of origin and how they were tracking that and how they were helping to make sure that by increasing the amount of renewables, you weren't cutting off streams of revenue for areas that had traditionally been like coal mining communities or oil farming communities. So finding ways to provide for those communities and saying this is still good for everybody. There's a benefit for this in everybody, even if it cuts off what had historically been a revenue stream for your area.
When you went to Denmark for the conference, did everyone speak English, or did you have to learn to speak whatever they speak in Denmark?
Danish. No, I did not have to learn how to
Yeah.
speak Danish. For the most part, everyone spoke English. If they didn't speak English, then often we could find common ground in my broken French. So that helped me. There was a couple of times going around Copenhagen where I would run into somebody that didn't speak English and would switch to French, and that would work. But at the conference itself, pretty much everyone spoke English, and those that didn't often had translators with them.
And the conference itself was in English? Like
Yes.
The presentations and
Mm-hmm.
the official language of the conference was English.
Yep.
Well, you're lucky then.
Yeah. No, I was lucky, but it was cool. There was a lot of translators that were there. So if somebody needed something at the conference, explain to them, or if there was a term they weren't familiar with, they had a whole system so could like bring a translator over and would help explain whatever the concept or the terminology was that it wasn't resonating with them.
All right. And so then after Evergreen, after you studied environmental science and economics, is when we started working together at People for Puget Sound.
Mm-hmm.
And I am curious, what was so special about this organization for you? Like, why, out of all of the different places you could have worked at that time, did you choose to work for People for Puget Sound?
Well, the most obvious answer to that was I graduated college at the beginning of the Great Recession, and they offered me benefits.
Gotta take that healthcare.
Yes, the healthcare is very much needed. Hang on, sorry, my chair is dropping. I just shrunk several inches. Give me a second here. There we go. Heyo, I am no longer tiny. No, so it was. I did have a couple job offers, but one of the things that really resonated with me was Puget Sound is just super special. It's this amazing place, this wonderful estuary, and it is suffering death by 1,000 cuts. On the west coast of the United States, we are lucky in the fact that we still have some places that are wild. And you don't see that in the eastern part of the country as much because, when Europeans started coming over, that's where they started. And then it came across the country this way. So we still have a lot of kind of virgin wilderness, and our megafauna isn't totally gone. We have these beautiful orcas out in the Sound that are an endemic subspecies. and it deserves protecting. And I appreciated that people for Puget Sound went for a very holistic approach of saving the sound. It wasn't just restoration, just legislation, just education, but it was a hybrid of these three things. And it said, in this lens of working in these three areas, we can have the greatest impact for saving this estuary. So at the same time that we were talking to donors, because again, I was in fundraising, that we were talking to donors about how their contribution would help put plants in restoration sites, we could also say that it would help to make sure that their voice is represented in our state capitol, to make sure that we're protecting this and that we're putting in legislation that wouldn't allow for continued environmental degradation.
Yeah, I just wanted to give you a chance to, go back in time and do your rap again. So, you know.
Oh man.
I assumed that after you did that, 30, 40 times a day for 5 years that you could pull it out again on a moment's notice, and you did. Good
There
job.
we go. Yeah, I still have canvassing nightmares every now and again.
Where's my pen? Where's my pen? Oh no.
Especially when it's really hot outside. Do you remember that magical pen that we found? Like, I found it on the ground, and every canvasser that used it, their first donation of the day was $120.
It went through, pen. Yeah.
It was like 3 or 4 canvassers, and the same thing happened with each one of us, and then it just disappeared back into the ether.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ugh.
Well, one of the reasons that I stayed there, because I started working for Greenpeace, and they made me very depressed, because everything about Greenpeace was always like, well, we're going to take some money and then give it somewhere. It's going to it seemed like a pyramid scheme in a lot of ways. Like, we're just going to take some money and then it's going to disappear out of here.
No, but you get a supporter, and then they get 3 supporters, and then each one of them get 3 supporters.
Oh, okay. Right. So it's not a pyramid scheme, it's a triangle plan.
Yes, exactly.
Yes. Okay. So the reason that I loved People for Puget Sound is that it was so local. Like, everything that I was doing, I could then see a result immediately. And I guess this is like, I couldn't handle long-term thinking, or I needed immediate gratification for my work, but I did. And I really appreciated being able to get some money one week, and then the next week be able to go to a river somewhere, a restoration site, and see the result of what I was doing. And that was always very nice. That was very gratifying. Mm-hmm. And it seems like I took a look at your Facebook profile, and I saw the jobs that you've done since People for Puget Sound, and you've seemed to stick with local organizations.
Yeah, for the most part.
Do you have a similar feeling that I do about local organizations? Is this on purpose, or did it just sort of happen accidentally?
No, it was very intentional. What I love about fundraising is it gives people the opportunity to make a difference in something they care about. I feel like, especially now, it is so easy to look at the news and get completely overwhelmed by what you see of what's happening in the world. And even at the local level, here in Seattle, we've had some really devastating protests that have been happening, and the way that protesters are being treated. It's just on either side of it. Everyone is just, their hands are up in the air. We're like, what do we even do? Where do we go from here? And it's so easy to fall into this mentality of, I'm one person, what the hell can I do? But when you're asking everybody that cares about something to just pitch in a little bit, that's how you really see systemic change. That's how you can really begin to build the society that we want to begin, and how we can see social evolution happening. So in fundraising, you give people the opportunity to make a difference about these very overwhelming issues, when otherwise they could feel completely powerless. Mm-hmm. For the most part, I have focused on local organizations because I do, like you, I like to see that direct impact. I like to see that happen really quickly. But it's also important to me to be directly contributing to the society that I'm a part of. And that goes a little bit back towards my studies in economics and the concept of velocity of money. So if you think about money as this thing that moves around and has like a little stream to it, the velocity of it within your own region where you're using your money to help support people in your neighborhood has a much stronger impact and a much greater economic impact than if that same dollar was spent on a national organization. Because if you think about it in terms of like a ripple, if you're throwing a pebble into a small pond, that ripple seems much bigger than if you were throwing a pebble into like a lake or into the ocean. And that's how I view the velocity of money with local organizations versus national organizations. National organizations definitely have their place because we need, especially if you're talking about legislative issues, we need reforms on all different levels. We need it at the federal level, at the local level. But I feel like I can have more of an impact here. And it also gives you the opportunity to get to know your community, which is something that is really important to me. I've always been a very civic-minded person. My parents ingrained that into me, and it's for me, it's important to know who your neighbors are because then you feel more ownership and accountability to your community.
Mm-hmm. Have you been involved in any political activities, anything like that since I left Seattle, since we stopped being in contact?
Yeah, we do it professionally and personally. So I personally, my husband and I run micro fundraisers for local candidates that we like. Our fabulous governor, Jay Inslee, has been the recipient of several of our little micro wine tasting fundraisers. We and then also for different campaigns that we believe in, whether it's marriage equality or gun control, some of the other things that we're really passionate about, we'll run small fundraisers. And it doesn't raise a huge amount of money, but it brings our friends together so we can help to have open conversations around issues and discuss often both sides of it and help people kind of educate themselves on an issue, but then also raise some support for it as well, because politics are very much fueled by money. Professionally, almost every position that I've had, there's been some type of advocacy work that's in it. So it's not just fundraising, it's also asking folks to contact local legislators or contact their city council. When I was with an organization called Citizens for Off-Leash Areas, or COLA, I was their executive director, and my job was pretty much like 50-50 fundraising and lobbying. So I was the dog lobby for the city of Seattle, which we have more dogs than kids in the city. There's like 2.5 dogs for every child in Seattle. And it's also like we have more dogs per capita than any other city in the country, but we have one of the smallest systems of legal off-leash land where you can let your dog run around and play with other dogs not on a leash. But digging into it, it became really obvious that the access to off-leash areas was very much a social justice issue because it was historically redlined communities or communities where either Black people were not or were allowed, they kind of were housed into specific areas, and just really horrible policies that existed in this country up until the 70s and 80s. Those areas had less access to public lands. And people that lived in those historically marginalized communities had consistently lower or smaller abilities to access legal recreation for their dogs, but they were also getting ticketed at a higher rate. So they were seeing more enforcement of leash laws in areas where there wasn't as much opportunity to do the legal thing, which wasn't right. That's not right. You can't tell a community, we're not going to give you access to this recreation, but then we're going to ticket you for not following the law.
Well, speaking of politics, everyone, and especially like non-Americans, people here that I know, everyone all over the world really, was quite shocked when Donald Trump was elected president. It was just like out of left field. And even though we've had like 4 years to get used to it, it's still kind of bizarre. Just the fact that he is president is weird. And you are kind of like an expert witness because you work in politics, you studied it, you do it. And unlike me, I also studied it, but I haven't lived there for almost 10 years. So I'm kind of out of touch now. So it's hard for me to explain these things.
Really been that long?
Almost.
Whoa.
Yeah.
That's bonkers.
So, could you maybe explain what happened in 2016?
Oh man. Oh, I feel like I need to get a bottle of wine. Uh, maybe a nice scotch for this. So I gotta say, Election Day 2016. I woke up, got my coffee, was feeling pretty good about the day. Washington is mail-in votes. It's vote by mail. So I had already cast my ballot for Hillary Clinton. Super excited about it. Called my dad. My parents live in Oregon. And I was like, hey, Dad, when your mom was born, women didn't have the right to vote in this country. And we're going to see the first woman president today. At the end of today, how does that feel? Like, that's where my mentality was at the beginning of election day. And I think a lot, I mean, at least in my neighborhood, the majority of people were thinking the same way. The polls were showing that there was no way Donald Trump could win. Everything was showing that Hillary Clinton was going to win. And then the votes started coming in, and everyone was just like, what is happening? Um, and my assumption is why the polls were so off. The way that the polling works in the United States is they poll likely voters, people that they think are the most likely to actually cast a ballot. But that's not the only people that were voting for Donald Trump. Donald Trump was engaging folks that had felt disenfranchised by the system for decades. So people that hadn't voted for a president potentially ever, or people that hadn't voted in several decades, were turning out to vote for the first time because they felt empowered by what he was saying. And in a sense, I get it. There was a lot of economic prosperity that was happening in this country at that time, but it was only happening to certain people. It was only happening to certain areas of the country. In that time, you know, if we look at our region of Seattle, or our region in Washington, the Seattle Puget Sound area, we saw kind of exponential growth. There was, 40,000 jobs that were coming in from one company alone. All of them were paying at least six figures. There was amazing benefits that were associated with that. And so you thought, oh, this is a region that's booming. But then you also had people that were getting pushed out of their apartments because they were working minimum wage jobs, and minimum wage, even at the federal level, hadn't increased in 15 years. So they were still making the same amount of money. They were, seeing that they weren't making any progress on their student loans. The jobs that they had, if they were manufacturing jobs, had gone away. They had either gone to different countries, or because of automation, their jobs were obsolete. And there wasn't enough attention being paid to those folks that were feeling totally disenfranchised, and feeling like they were getting cut out of the American dream that we've been all sold on. And so when somebody comes along and says, this is not your fault, the system has been failing you, we need better policies, we need these things, we need somebody that's an outsider because the government has been failing you all these years, that's a really seductive message. And it's really easy to buy into that and to go into that, even though there was this dichotomy of what Trump was saying and what his own practices as a business owner had been. And so it was very much listening to what he was saying instead of looking at the track record. And the more out there that he got, the more bizarre things that he had said on the campaign trail, the more coverage he got. And at a certain point, the voice of reason started getting, voice of reason is the wrong term. The voice of the more moderate Republicans started getting drowned out. And so people were just so energized by this that they got really eaten up by this fever that happened. And so there was no way that the polls really could have gotten it unless they asked everybody instead of just likely voters. But that's where we are. And then stuff just started turning, and you would start to see some of the policies that were going out. And I'm one of those people. I do not believe that every Donald Trump voter supports every policy that he has. And it's much like the Democratic candidates. I don't support every policy that they are in support of. But often in the media, or in social media, really, in interactions with each other, there's no nuance to the conversation. You're either in or you're out. You're a supporter or you're not. You're for him, you're against him, and so it gets pitted into this tribalism. And so people, and anytime that happens, people become fiercely protective over what is seen as their tribe. So you see people that are very, very passionate about supporting him, even if they don't agree with all of his policies, because of this tribalism that has just been exacerbated in our society right now.
Mm-hmm. And Rodrigo, would you say that if you just removed like the name Trump from that description, could you use the same description to talk about the current Brazilian president Bolsonaro and what's been happening here?
Not only could I say that, but I was going to. It's that is exactly it's Nicole. You just described our situation. It's exactly the same. Exactly the same. This week I was talking to a friend of mine that is not a our Trump supporter, Bolsonaro supporter. I don't know which Trump is. I don't want to use the word worse, but I don't know which Trump is more confusing or weird, yours or ours. But we do have a Trump here, and I was talking to him and he said no, every Bolsonaro supporter is how can I say? I'm gonna simplify, but is a bad person, and they have no character, and they're bad. And I said, but I grew up with a bunch of people that like I know they're not bad people. I know they don't hate, and they voted for Bolsonaro. So I know for a fact because I follow them through life that they're nice people. It turns out they're not politically engaged. They are not aware. They're not naive, of course, but they're not aware of the whole spectrum of policies and politics of Bolsonaro, and they got they got lured into that. They got seduced. I don't know by that talk. We 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 also have people that felt left out of the conversation, the discussion, and well, it's very very similar. What's going on now? Very very similar. I don't see. I know that we're going to talk about the future in a few minutes, but just I don't see like now. It seems to me that Biden or that there's a change in the way people think, in the way people see things. But in Brazil, Bolsonaro's popularity just rose some 3 or 4% points like a week ago. So, and I wasn't expecting that, and I saw the news, and then I said, "Well, right." So I don't know. I don't know what to feel anymore. I'm hopeful for you guys. I remember following the election day with Ryan. I think the two past election days we did it, Ryan. We watched everything together. I remember I woke up 5:30 in the morning here, and when I went to bed, Hillary was ahead, and then I woke up and I think a website Politico.com and Donald Trump, new president, and I said, Jesus Christ, what is what is this? And then I messaged Ryan. Ryan had disappeared for a day. I think he went into the woods and to think about life. And then and the same thing happened in Brazil. So well, that's it.
And I think one other piece that neither of you mentioned that kind of explains what happened is that in both countries, and I think it's worse in Brazil because it was longer, the opposition was out of power for a long time. In Brazil, it was like 13 years. Or yeah, they were out of power for 13 years, and then they got like an impeachment and put somebody else in for 3 years before Bolsonaro was elected. So you could say it was 16 years. You could. And in the United States, the Republicans were out of power for 8 years. And so a lot of people were just desperate to get back. And a lot of people were afraid of never getting back power. And so I think one explanation for some people, not everyone, but there is this group of people who are power afraid, I think, of what would happen if the liberals had power. Oh my God, then life would end as we know it. And they're afraid, and they saw like this election as like the end of the world. And so they said, Donald Trump can win, and that's all that I care about.
I think that, I mean, there's definitely some truth to that, but I also feel, if you look back over the history of the democratic experiment in America, it is very rare so we have a system here where a president can only have 2 terms. 8 years is the max. That started when FDR was I think the only president that had 3 terms. He died partway in office for that 3rd term. And then Congress amended the Constitution so that 2 terms is now the maximum for any president. I'm trying to remember that you have a Brazilian audience as well, so making sure to explain those things before just buffaloing into the point.
Sure.
But of those presidents that get 2 terms, it is exceptionally rare for that. I can say his because we've never had a female president. It's very rare for his party to win again. It almost always goes back to that opposition after those 8 years. There's definitely some exceptions to that, but that's been pretty consistently the case. So that is, not to be unexpected that you would see the Republicans win over the Democrats after the Democrats had 8 years in the 8 years in the Oval Office. However, to say that the Democrats had power for 8 years is not the full picture of it, because it was really only 2 years, those first 2 years, where the Democrats had control of the House and the Senate and the executive branch, i.e. the presidency. After that, there was this big switch where the Senate and the House of Representatives was controlled by Republicans. And that was the first time in like 60-some or 40-some years that happened. So that one was a pretty exceptional change. And then once that happened, any type of progress in this country just kind of went to a grinding halt. There was just continuous obstruction over any type of policy getting passed, over any legislation. There was no compromise that was happening. And you started to see, I think that was kind of the beginning stages of this tribalism between Democrats and Republican. And before Obama ran for president, he had, at the Democratic National Convention, had this amazing speech that so many people remember, where he talked about there is no red America, there is no blue America, meaning there's no Republican America, there's no Democrat America. We are the United States of America. And there was a moment in time where I feel like that was true. But because of this buy-in to this tribalism that has just been exacerbated by either side of most of the media, people exist in echo chambers. And so it pits us against each other, and it makes it more and more difficult to get this progress. So now kind of the most radical thing to happen is to be a moderate on an issue and to say, oh, I'm sorry, there's nuance and I see both sides of this. Which is really unfortunate. And so you often see these things get pitted to extremes. And I think that Trump is definitely the extreme on one side, but that's the thing that is so attractive to Biden for so many people, is it's this moderate voice. I view myself as a very progressive person on the majority of policy issues. But that's one thing that I really appreciate about Biden. The fact that John Kasich, who is a Republican, was a Republican governor, ran for the Republican presidential nomination against Trump. The fact that he was speaking on behalf of Biden, people are like, "Oh, he's a traitor to his party." I'm like, "But this isn't supposed to be about our party. This is supposed to be about our country." And it's saying that there's a different way. We don't have to fall into this, it's us versus them, but let's take a moment to try to remember how we can put our country before our party. How can we put our country before our ideologies? And since having a kid, my view on politics has changed a lot. So I have a 2.5-year-old. And I used to be much more extreme in terms of buying into that us versus them. But since I've had a kid, I realize that a lot of our decisions on politics are this idea of accountability. Who are you accountable to? And I think that that's why it's easy for folks to vote against what might be seen as their best interest, because you have to think about who you're accountable to. If you are accountable to just your family, saying that, for me, it is important that I build the society that I want to hand down to my kids. And that's something that I think pretty much everybody can agree with that statement. Everybody's going to feel that. I want to leave this world a better place. But what is our idea of that? And who is it that we want to leave it better for? Do we want to leave it better for our kids? And that means building them a wealth so they never have to worry about poverty. And it's regardless of who that impacts, I'm just going to continue to get as much money as I can so my family will be secured for generations? Or is it, I want to protect these trees. I want to protect this forest, this jungle, because this is a legacy that I want to hand down to my kids. Is it, I want to protect this idea of marriage being only between a man and a woman, because that is something that I believe in, and I am accountable to society to defend that. So I think it's this idea of who are we accountable to, and that is what helps to guide our political decisions. And that's what helps to guide our thoughts and our philosophies on things, because it's not just about how we feel about things, but we feel certain ways about things because we see how it benefits our view of society, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so. I think I think so. I think like a lot of this tribalism is because it sells. In the media, it's very popular to have good guys and bad guys, and you can have one storyline where the good guys triumph over the bad guys, and that's a great story. And another story is that you're the victim, and that the bad guys are beating you, and you're a victim. And those are two stories that sell. They're really great stories. But if like you as a just regular person go and talk to people, there really aren't that many bad guys, and there aren't that many good guys. Like, there are just a lot of people who are usually pretty uninformed, trying to make the best of whatever situation they're in. And most people's situation is pretty shitty. So most people are trying to make the best of a shitty situation without enough information. And like, if they do something that you disagree with, like take a chill pill and don't say you're an evil person that is doing evil things. No, probably they just have a different perspective than you, and maybe you're the one that's wrong. So calm down for a second and slow your roll, man.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think I learned canvassing, because I talk to 100 people every day, and now teaching because I talk to tons of people every day and have long conversations with all of my students, and they're all really different, and I just have a lot of more humility about the things that I think are right. Yeah.
So I had a question for y'all.
Sure.
So, I don't know, going a little bit back to the ideas of tribalism, a little bit back to the ideas of kind of a dichotomy in ideology, the original stuff that we were talking about. So I was doing some research because I wanted to make sure to have good questions to ask you guys. I was doing some research on Brazil's history, and how Bolsonaro was connected to some of these things and his viewpoints on it. And I came across something that I just found really interesting, and so I was wondering if you could shed some light on this for me. So, in the stuff that Bolsonaro has said, he said that it sounded like he was in very much in support of the military dictatorship. There was one line in particular where he said, I wrote it down so I would remember, 20 years of order. He referred to it as 20 years of order and progress. But then he seems to be aligning himself or trying to align himself more with countries that are viewed as democracies. So what, like, is that like those two things that are conflicting? Is that ever discussed? Is that something that is analyzed or looked at? That he seems to, in many ways, lionize the idea of the dictatorship, but in his foreign policy is really trying to step away from countries that might be seen as dictators, might be seen as dictatorships, and embracing democracies more.
I don't know. What countries are you talking about, first of all? What foreign countries?
Oh, specifically, the examples that I saw kind of really consistently was Russia. That was a good example, how he was saying that he wanted to consider, would be open to a U.S. military base in Brazil to help fight off the influence of Russia in the region, in South America. And the same thing with China, where he's trying to back farther and farther away from diplomatic ties with China, and is working more closely with like Italy and the United States and India. So it just seems to me that there was an ideological conflict between these two things. That I was just kind of fascinated by that.
To better understand the ideology of Bolsonaro, you have to know that he's a mishmash of everything of everything, and to understand someone that you might want to read. Well, I don't know if you will like it, but Olavo de Carvalho, I'll write it up for you. He has been the ideologist behind Bolsonaro's government. But Bolsonaro itself, he's smart, he's intelligent, but he's a simple man, you know? So Olavo de Carvalho has the Olavistas, the Olavists, and then there are Bolsonaristas, and they're all very confusing. They don't know exactly what they want. They don't know exactly. Today they say something good. They say something bad about China. Now they only say bad stuff. But today they might say something good about Russia, and then tomorrow they might say something bad, and they just roll with the punches. You know, they go as they think. They're trying to defend themselves. They're very defensive. They're so this what is the word? This clash of ideologies, this clash of interests, is very common in the government. It is very, very common. It's not only in this part. They call themselves liberals. They say they are conservative, but at the same time, they further away from conservatives because some things they defend are very reactionary, not so much conservative. This thing with the military dictatorship, Bolsonaro was in the military, and he's just not just that's big, but he's an old man. He's an older man, and he just wants to say that he liked it, and I wasn't a communist, so I had no problem with that. Only communists had trouble with that. So it was good for me. There were no poor people on the street. There were no bad guys on the street because the army was on the street. So it was great for what is the expression they use for good citizens, cidadãos de bem. Yeah, for good people, for good-hearted people, something like that. And it's he just he makes everything seems very no, that was normal torture, but there was torture like there was always torture in the history of mankind. So what is one more? It's fine, and they had guns after all, so why not torture them? They were considered rebels. So I think talking about their ideology is overestimating their organization. They're not organized. They're not really organized.
That's exactly what I would say.
Things come and go, and everyday things change. In the beginning of Corona, for example, of COVID, he said a lot of stuff, and now all numbers have proved him wrong, and they're just quiet about all that, And one day they say something, and then the other day, the only thing they still seem to hold on to is the hydroxychloroquine.
Oh.
They're gonna, yeah. This has been going on forever, and a lot of people have been taking that just as prophylactics, and well, I don't know.
Destroying their liver in the meantime.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly.
And I would add, like you saying that calling what they have an ideology is giving them too much credit. Yeah, I would agree. And I would also add that for Bolsonaro, a lot of what he does is based on relationships. So, like, I think he's wrong, but he thinks that he's Trump's best friend. So he doesn't really care about the complex foreign policy implications of whatever is going on with the United States. He just likes being Trump's friend. Yeah, that's the entire point of everything.
So that's another thing that I was super curious about, what it is like for folks from Brazil, because I mean the dictatorship was backed by the US. So that is, I can only imagine that has got to put a sour taste in your mouth for the United States. And then to have Bolsonaro trying to be all buddy with the U.S. and like I'm just so curious how the population kind of responds to those two things.
No, because the population, people here love the United States, and some very few people understand that it was the United States that caused the dictatorship. Some people like know this intellectually, but like no one. I've never met a single person, even the like radical communists, who were like, the United States is evil and they caused the dictatorship. Screw America. I have never met anyone who says this. And most of the population is like, oh, the dictatorship. Yeah, it happened. Do you know the United States did it? No. The United States, they weren't involved. I don't know anything about that. And that's how most people are. So now you have the government trying to be friends with the United States, which before Bolsonaro, the official position of the government was to be more like neutral. Like, okay, the United States is cool, they're fine, but also China is cool. And also everyone else. We're cool with everyone. That's great. And now the position is America, let's be friends with Trump. And everyone in the country is like, well, all right, I like Disneyland. That's cool. And that's generally how people think.
Ryan's not wrong. Not at all. It's exactly how people think. Yeah, we nobody knows about this. It's not that nobody knows, but people, education here is not that great. People don't understand all the implications of America being connected to or America being the cause, or America, or the military dictatorship being backed by America. People don't understand the implications of that. It's just like, yeah, I understand. And even if they do, they connect it to the president at the time, or to the government, and to the, so you don't, most people don't make that connection often.
Well, honestly, even in the United States, a lot of people don't make that connection. I can say, in terms of our public education system, because I went through public education, and when we were studying that period of history, when we were studying the United States relations with Central and South America, it was all very much through the lens of the Cold War of, oh, well, communism was bad, and so we had to do everything we could to stop communism. And the only reason that I got introduced to some other viewpoints on that, besides what our teachers were saying, is that my brother is a historian. My brother has his PhD in history, and had some very interesting things to say about it, and made a point of trying to help me see the other side. And my dad did the same thing, like trying to help me see the other side of it, and say, yeah, when we talk about the dictatorship in Brazil, when we talk about the ousting of Jacobo Arbenez in Guatemala, it wasn't always a good thing. Like there was some really bad things that our foreign policy did, and that's an important thing for understanding kind of the nuance of your country's history. I guess nuance is going to be like the word of the day for this conversation.
It's going to be in the
This
title,
episode is brought to you by the word nuance.
The more you know. And even though I studied political science and I started out studying history, my major was history for 2 years, I never heard a single thing about the Brazilian military dictatorship until I came to Brazil. I had never heard a word. I didn't even know there was a military dictatorship in Brazil until I came here, and people were like, oh yeah, there was a dictatorship. And I was like, huh. So was the US involved? Maybe. And then I had to go and find out that, yeah, very much involved. Which seems like a failing on the part of my education. Like Brazil, one of the world's largest countries and super important. We don't need to tell you anything about it. It's
right?
Not important.
Something that we Brazilian people, we see Americans as, how can I say? No, not you guys, but we. Well, that's difficult. I have two Americans to explain that to. So, yeah. Well, 1.5. Ryan is half Brazilian now.
If you go by the idea that your cells replenish every whatever years, I'm pretty much 100% Brazilian now.
So no, but the way we in school we learn a lot about history and geography of everywhere. We learn a lot about all countries, not all countries, but most important big countries. We learn about America, Russia, India, China, population, information about each country at some point. And when we talk to American people, I think Conan or Kimmel, they had some sketches about this, where they interview people on the streets. Can you point Brazil to me on a map? Something like this. And we have that idea of American people, that you guys don't learn so much about other countries. And now for Bolsonaro supporters, that's actually a good thing. It's actually nice that you learn more about your country, because then you can make your country stronger. It's a simple kind of thinking. I understand the logics behind it, but and they're trying to do the same here. The education, the Minister of Education, that he was trying to no, Brazil for Brazilian, but what about the native Brazilian people? No, not them. they're it's Brazilian people, but they native. No, it's everybody's Brazilian. What about the black people? No, it's just Brazilian. So, like all lives matter and stuff like that. And so, this is how we see the American education. It's something simple that I like to say, but we see you guys as it's just like the way Ryan and I were talking to an English teacher, and he said that you guys don't learn specific grammar when you're in school, and we do here in Brazil. We learn like 10 years of grammar, and we after the 10 years of grammar we don't remember anything, but we learned it. Um, so it's just we see American educational system like that. You learn more about America than about other countries. Is that true, Ryan and Nicole?
Ish. I would say ish. We learn a very revisionist history of America. We learn the Manifest Destiny version of America. So being from Oregon, we learned. I'm sure Ryan, it was true for you too. In fourth grade, you learn all about the Oregon Trail.
Oh
Beyond
yeah.
video game. Yep. Um, and so they tell you the story of, oh, these amazing people were leaving from Missouri to go across the Oregon Trail and creating our great state. But what they don't, and then like, oh, it was so dangerous for them because these horrible Indians would come and raid their parties, and so you had to protect them, and they had to do all these things. But what they don't talk about is how, in the process of doing that, they were stealing land from people. They were breaking treaty agreements. There were, folks there were enslaved Americans that were trying to go along to get to the West Coast as well, but then they would do everything they could to get them back into the South so they could continue to be enslaved. And there's all these parts about it that we don't talk about. So we talk
Or
about
here we learn about the United States, but we don't. I didn't learn anything about Canada or Mexico.
yeah, I learned
And like one great example is the Mexican American War. And like the United States basically just stole half of Mexico
yeah,
in an unprovoked war.
yep.
And in history class, the history class was like one day, like, and then there was a Mexican American War. And then because of that, we got California. The
Yeah.
end. Like,
Yes,
wait.
you don't
So there was like no context for this war, nothing. No, we're just moving on to the next thing.
Yep, let's just not talk about it.
Yeah, because basically it was just a theft. Like the United States was like, we want that, and Mexico was like, but nope, no buts. Thank you. We're leaving now.
Yeah, yeah. Or the
So
treatment,
maybe
if we look at the treatment of the indigenous peoples of our country and the smallpox blankets, how that's something that most kids do not learn about that. Of how when there was parties going out to the western part of the United States, when there was military forces going out, they would pass these goodwill boxes out to the different tribes, and the blankets and the food that they gave them were contaminated. There was smallpox on the blankets that they were like intentionally infected. There was tainted whiskey that was passed out to people, things that they know would cause blindness or extreme illness, that was passed out to indigenous people. So we don't talk about that. Those are things that we just gloss over. It's like when you go on a date and you have a really good date, and then your parents are like, oh, how was it? You're not going to tell them how you might have gotten busy on the first night. No way. You're like, oh, he was just really nice and respectful. It was a really good day. Like you go over to the nice things. You don't get into the gritty details of it that might be questionable.
Yeah, except in this case, because that is all of the history, and then the kids are expected to like be citizens because of it. It's more
Yeah.
like just getting married based on someone's Tinder profile.
Yeah, pretty much. I was astonished. And part about being in a democracy is you expect a base level of participation. You expect people to vote. You expect to make your voice is your part of this process. Your vote is your voice. And I was astonished by when Trump was impeached, the amount of people that didn't understand like basic election procedures, and the amount of people that thought, oh, well, he's impeached, so he's not allowed to run again. And I'm like, no, that's not how it works. That's not how it works. Those two things are not connected to each other. But we do such a horrible, we don't do a great job about educating people about the things that matter, like our election systems or our procedures around how somebody gets to be a president, how somebody gets to be in Congress. We just gloss over those things as well as glossing over our history. It's a very, very small view of it. I actually learned the most, I feel like I learned the most about my country when I was living overseas, and learning what other people knew about it that I wasn't aware of. And that for me just fueled this curiosity to want to learn more, to learn the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I feel like if you want to, it's important to know these things, because if you love your country, you need to know all aspects of it. Just like, you know, there is an unconditional love that I have for my spouse. There's an unconditional love that I have for my child. And that means the good, the bad, and the ugly, all of it. So true patriotism shouldn't be excluding these dark parts of your history or these things you might not want to talk about it, but you discuss how you got to that point and then say, how can we make sure that doesn't happen again? And instead of ignoring it, you embrace that it's a part of you, it's a part of your history, and then figure out how can you be better from that and how can you make it better for all citizens in your country.
Sure. Well, to wrap up, to finish, there is another election coming very soon. And do you have any predictions? Do you have any reason to think it will be different this time or the same? What is your prediction for the election coming up in November?
Wow. I mean, there's what I want to happen. There's what I think is probably going to happen. And then there's kind of my worst case scenario fear. Honestly, let me get a drink of coffee. My worst case scenario fear is that we will have unintentionally low voter turnout because people aren't going to be given their right to vote. I feel like the right to vote is something that should be held sacred above all else. And every American should do everything that we can to make sure that everyone that wants to vote has the right to vote and the opportunity to vote. And I'm very concerned that with a couple pieces here being the pandemic, being the way that our postal system, our federalized postal system is being dismantled, and the way municipalities are taking away polling places and taking away places where people can go to vote, that we're going to see a lot of folks that try to vote but aren't allowed to. And unfortunately, when that happens, that tends to only benefit one party, and that tends to benefit the Republican Party, which is really, it's sad. This should be, the right to vote is something that shouldn't be partisan. It should be, it's every American, to be a patriot, should defend everyone's right to vote. That's my own opinion of it. What I would like to see happen is a big show for Joe Biden, personally, because I, you know, like I said, I don't agree with all of his policies, but I think that there is a level of maturity that has been missing from the White House. I feel like it is this. I feel like Joe Biden and Kamala Harris want to try to benefit the most Americans. And one of the things that really bothers me about the rhetoric of Donald Trump is he finds a way to narrow the view as to who is worthy of American prosperity. And I think that anybody that wants to should be able to thrive in this country, and that's not often what we see as a result of his policies. What I think is probably going to happen is it gets complicated because then we have to talk about the Electoral College. So the Electoral College is something that's hella confusing for a lot of people. People outside of the country tend to not understand it. Most Americans tend to not understand it. And on multiple occasions, a person has won the popular vote and lost the presidency, which is what happened with Hillary Clinton. She won the popular vote, but she lost the presidency because of the Electoral College. And it has to do with how many subvotes each state gets. And it's complicated math. And I think that if we are not able to convince enough of the states that had supported Trump the last time around that he's going to lose the popular vote but win the presidency again, because we have to focus on those Great Lakes states. We have to focus on the areas that are have felt disenfranchised and felt left out of the economic boom after the Great Recession. And I don't know if enough has been done to reach out to those folks, specifically the white middle class voters, the white blue collar workers that feel like they have been left out of this conversation, and felt ignored. And the view is they've been ignored for the sake of identity politics. And I don't think that's the case. I think that we need to do a better job of helping people understand that just because someone else is doing well doesn't mean you're doing bad. It doesn't mean you're doing poorly. But with this idea of I need to get my slice of the pie, the idea is there's only so much pie to go around, but that's not true. We can all succeed. We can all do better. But we have to find a way to make that happen. And that's why I really hope that Biden wins, because I think that he has the vision that will get us there. But I don't know.
I'm going to say that I sort of agree with you, but I think the most likely thing is that my optimist and pessimist views go further out. Okay. So I think the most likely thing is that Biden wins, but my worst case scenario is much darker than yours, because I think a worst case scenario that's actually kind of scary and likely is that we wake up the day after election, and then for days and weeks after, we actually don't know who won. And this level of uncertainty persists for a very long time, because there are so many ballots that are taking forever to get in from the Postal Service or for other pandemic-related reasons. And so in this vacuum of ignorance, a lot of weird stuff can happen. And that is my worst case scenario, is that there are weeks or months of not knowing who the president is.
Hanging chads on steroids.
Yeah. And in more than one state.
Yeah.
It's like, imagine if 30 states don't know who the president should be.
Well, that's one of the things too, that it's getting into the weeds around election law. We don't have a large number of states do not have the requirement of a paper ballot, and they do electronic voting machines. And these electronic voting machines, time and time again, have been shown to be very easy to manipulate, to hack, to change the results. And if you don't have a paper ballot to back it up, which is basically just, okay, so you go into this thing and there's a touch screen and you touch who you want to be president, and then a piece of paper is printed off that says this is what the vote was. So that way you don't just go by what's in the computer, but you also go by the hard physical evidence. And if you don't have both of those, you can't tell if the electronic machine is off. Mm-hmm. And that is a thing that should be of concern, because Americans have very short attention spans. We're kind of like squirrel to a lot of stuff. And with the pandemic happening, a lot of folks are focused on that, as we should be, because it's a very, very serious thing, and we should be concerned about it. We should make sure that we're staying healthy and safe. But that also means that conversations around securing our elections are not happening with the urgency that they need to happen.
Yeah. And like I said, the most likely thing that I think will happen is that Biden wins. But this is 2020 after all, it's the year of the worst case scenario. We had a pandemic. There are murder hornets in Washington. Yeah. There's an asteroid. It's not very big, but there is an asteroid that's supposed to hit the planet on election day. Like
fire tornadoes. There's fire tornadoes in California.
Fire tornadoes. There's 2 hurricanes hitting Texas at the same moment right now.
There was an inland hurricane in Iowa. Did you hear about that?
An inland hurricane
came out of nowhere. They had no warning. Boom.
There was a storm in Brazil of locusts. There was a locust storm where it was raining locusts.
I mean, that's some biblical shoot there.
So 2020 is not really the year to be like, well, the most likely thing that's going to happen. So let's not worry about the worst possible case. It's not really a good time for that. So here we go.
Something that I can't wait to see is the world in 5 years, and how Hollywood will handle all the stuff that's been going on in 2020. And because a lot of history here in Brazil, specifically, a lot of the history we know about America, about Brazil, and about the world has been shown us through Hollywood. So maybe in 5 years or in 10 years, like there will be a movie about how, I don't know. I don't even know. I, I can't even imagine. And
Just so much happened. It would have to be like a 1,000-part miniseries.
Do you guys remember that Australia was on
exactly.
fire at the beginning of this year?
Yeah.
I totally
Yes.
forgot about that until someone was like, "Oh, the fires in Australia." I'm like, "What? Oh my gosh, that's right. Like half of the continent burned."
Yeah.
And
2020 has been a long
before
century, hasn't
that,
it?
yeah, before that, Brazil was also, there was a big
Yeah.
fire in Brazil.
Oh,
So, well, but 2019, I guess. Well,
well, I was reading that, there's a lot of concern because there hasn't been the rainfall that's needed and the deforestation season, like the slash and burn season for farmers in Brazil is starting. So people are just kind of like holding their breath, waiting to see what happens.
Yep.
And
yeah,
it's, uh, I mean, I just feel like it's,
five people.
maybe this year, just give it a break. Maybe just not this year. Be like, we're going to put this on pause for 1 year.
Nope. Not going to happen.
Ugh.
Well, anyway, on that happy note, thanks, Nicole. Thanks for showing up. Thanks for talking.
Wait, I have somebody here that wants to say hi.
Okay.
Hey,
Hey.
on a happy note, it's
Hey,
Ruru.
Rue. Nice. A cute dog to say goodbye to everybody. Thanks, everybody, for watching. Thanks, Nicole, for coming. And maybe we'll see you again. Maybe we'll talk to you after the election so we can either all laugh or cry together. We'll see.
Yeah.
But see you guys. See everybody. And
Yeah.
later.